Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Eurogas Let's Meet, where today we will be looking at one of the most important elements of the Fit for 55 package. We'll be looking at how the decarbonised gases that we need by 2030 and 2050 can be actually achieved. And that's why today we've called our event, Do We Need Targets to Decarbonise Gas? I'm very happy to say we have a very, very stellar list of experts who have lots of insights to share with us on how they see the future of the gas sector and how the gas sector can contribute to meeting our objectives under the Green Deal of getting to carbon neutrality and climate neutrality by 2050. Indeed, we did actually plan to have the keynote speech from Christian Silviu Bușoi, who is, of course, the chair of the Industry and Energy Committee in the European Parliament, to start with a keynote speech. He is unfortunately in a meeting with the Commissioner and will be available with us at 10 o'clock. So he will be coming, ladies and gentlemen, but we'll have to slightly change the order of discussion. And so we'll start with our panel discussants. And then when he arrives around 10 o'clock, we will ask him to give his speech. But of course, there will be time for Q&A. And I must encourage you all, because of course, these events depend very much on you and your engagement with us, to actually ask questions and to put forward comments and points of view, which I, as a moderator, will be happy to pass on to the discussants that we have and see what their views are on the ideas and thoughts that you have. We are, ladies and gentlemen, just weeks away from the Fit for 55 package being launched. Indeed, on the 14th of July, famous, of course, as a sort of French Revolution Day, storming the Bastille. Will this be a new revolution, an energy revolution on July the 14th? And storming the old incumbents? We will see. We'll see what the European Commission have up their sleeves. I'm sure that many of you will have seen leaks that have come out from the European Commission and documents, and already start formulating some of your ideas of what these things could look like. In Eurogas, we have a strong view that indeed gaseous fuels will be important to the decarbonisation of many of the sectors that we will find that we will use gas in today, but we will use gas in tomorrow. And we think that a good way of getting to that point is indeed to use targets. We think that if you actually set binding EU-level targets on the amount of renewable gases that are produced and on the overall greenhouse gas intensity of gases and how they can be reduced by 2030, 2040 and 2050, this would be a good way to incentivize industry to actually make the investments in the right kinds of technologies that will help us achieve the objectives of the Green Deal. This is one of the ideas that we have. And it's not just us. We had a paper recently with 14 other associations who have signed up to this idea. And so I see growing support for the idea of targets to deliver the decarbonisation of gas. Of course, targets may not be the only tools we will use. Of course, there are other measures. There's ETS, there's carbon pricing, there's guarantees of origin. There are many different tools in our toolbox which can help us to get there. And so today we'll be looking forward to discussion with very knowledgeable experts in the field who will be able to tell us what their views are and whether or not targets are a mechanism that they would support, or whether they see other mechanisms to get the best out of the gas sector to deliver on carbon neutrality. I remind you all again, dear participants, please do ask questions. There is a Q&A function. Please do go through the Q&A function and ask any question you would like. I'll be very happy to put those questions through. Please remember to put your name and the organization that you represent. And I will be very happy to put those to the people that you are directing those questions to. So without further ado, I would like to begin today's event with indeed the opening panel discussant, who is Alexandra Tudoriu-Lakovice, who is the head of policy from Cogen Europe, the Cogeneration Association. And a very good morning to you, Alexandra, and thank you for joining us. I suppose that we've seen CHP is a very efficient and very well thought of technology and is used in a number of industrial purposes. We've seen in Italy, for example, paper mills that we were of using CHP, blending gas, including new hydrogen to reduce their overall carbon footprint. How are you in Cogen seeing the kind of development of such projects like that, and how can we scale up the volumes of the low carbon and renewable gases that we need? What's Cogen's views on that?
Yes, good morning, James, and thank you very much for the invitation. So as Cogen Europe, we are the voice of the cogeneration in Europe. We actually represent the entire energy value chain from CHP manufacturers, from the megawatt to the kilowatt, actually, to utilities, to system operators, including gas system operators, ESCOs and users of CHP. And indeed, we have large-scale users, industrial users in particular, that need both heat and power to produce either paper or ceramics, or alumina, for instance, or food and drink sector is also represented. But CHP is quite present in district heating as well. So CHP using gas, but not only, other fuels as well, represents about 50 to 70% of district heating. As well as we have increasingly micro CHPs in homes, so in people's cellars. There's quite a few micro CHPs and fuel cell micro CHPs that are connected to the gas networks. So this is Cogen Europe in a nutshell. Cogeneration today represents 10% of, 11% of electricity and about 15% of heating and cooling across Europe and across various sectors. And it delivers more than 250 million tons of CO2 reductions, which is the emissions equivalent to around 100 million petrol cars in Europe. So that's quite significant already. But we see a lot of potential for CHP to actually deliver more emission reductions. In the first step, we see a fuel switch from coal to gas, to natural gas, but then increasingly to renewable and decarbonized gases. So in order for the sector to move forward and grow in district heating, in industry, in homes, we actually need that certainty that there will be a scale up of renewable and decarbonized gases, including hydrogen. Manufacturers are already developing hydrogen-ready systems, so there is no question of lock-in. We have today systems that can run on up to 20%, up to 100% of hydrogen, depending on when that renewable hydrogen is available. And so we actually do think that targets for renewable and decarbonized gases, and more generally to decarbonize the gas sector, will be beneficial to actually put or decarbonize all of the economy, not only industry, but also district heating, as well as buildings that are connected to the gas network. And as you said, James, targets are not sufficient. They are necessary, but not sufficient. We do need an enabling framework for renewable and decarbonized gases. And we need consistency across the EU and national legislation. So we cannot promote renewable gases just in the Renewables Directive. We need recognition of gas appliances that are future ready and renewables ready in the Energy Efficiency Directive, in the Energy Labeling Directive. Even within the ETS, we need more consistency and a level playing field between all decarbonization technologies, including gas, including electrification and gas. We see that they need to be on a level playing field. And we also need a regulatory framework which supports that recognition for renewable and decarbonized gases. So the more technical level, gas quality is an issue. We need manufacturers to really understand better what the gas quality will be once those renewable gases are increasingly coming on the grid, so that they can adapt their technologies to a changing gas quality, so to say. And also the renewables ready framework should be in place. So we should have recognition that gas equipment can run on hydrogen increasingly, and that will ensure that manufacturers scale up production and they bring these solutions to market. That's all for now, but I'm happy to get questions.
Well, thank you, Alexandra. That's perfectly on time, delivered in 5 minutes, as requested by us. So I have to say, very good timekeeping. Also, you touched on a number of very interesting points. I remind the audience to be able to ask questions because I will have the opportunity to put them to the panelists. And thank you very much, Alexandra. You've touched on some interesting points about what kind of an enabling framework is needed for renewable and decarbonised gases. And you've talked about things like hydrogen. And of course, we've seen interesting ideas that have been put forward, perhaps for specific hydrogen targets within the Renewable Energy Directive. But we will come on to that sort of discussion later. I will now be very happy to ask Matthias Buck. I'm very happy to have Matthias with us today, who's the Director of European Energy Policy at Agora Energiewende. And indeed, Matthias, thank you very much for joining us today. I cast my mind back to when I just started at Eurogas, actually, back in beginning of 2019, and you'd put forward a report which discussed about the possibilities for developing green hydrogen on a quota basis, which you might say is similar to a target or not, depending on your point of view. Wondering now, Matthias, how are you in Agora Energiewende seeing the developments of renewable and low carbon gases? And what's your evolution, your thinking over those last 2.5 years? And good morning, Matthias. Nice to see you.
Good morning, James, and good morning to all out there. And thanks for inviting me to this presentation. Let me just share with you very few slides that I brought up. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see. We
okay.
can see. Thanks, Matthias.
Okay, now quickly running through. So we have evolved a bit, James, when we were talking about the big picture for Europe in early 2019, we were not yet aware of the higher climate ambition of the von der Leyen Commission. And of course, the Commission has itself done a lot of work to specify what does the higher target by 2030 and indeed climate neutrality by latest 2050 mean for the energy system. And now picking up on the Commission's own assessment, what you see in there across the different scenarios they've been developing, that there is a significant absolute reduction in natural gas consumption in Europe in order to achieve our 2030 climate target by 30%. And by the end of 2023, the Commission must propose the remaining European budget of greenhouse gas emissions until Europe reaches climate neutrality. This will be an indicative budget. Nevertheless, it will be an important reference point for all future debate on where to use different types of fossil fuels and where those uses are particularly important in the future to bring us cost effectively to climate neutrality. Now, from that perspective, for me as a starting point, it's clear we are looking at the shrinking market when we're looking at natural gas. And so if we're looking now at what the Commission is preparing as the legislative package, there's a package coming out in July. As you said, it's a revolutionary package on Revolution Day. And we're expecting a second package in Q4 this year, probably in December, which will look more at the molecules specifically. So buildings directive, gas markets legislation, methane leakage rules. And so looking at the Q4 package is probably the more important one, perhaps for your discussion here. And we see this really as a transition package. And what needs to happen there is that we must be very clear in the future, where are the priority uses for the remaining fossil gas? Where are the priority uses for renewable gases, particularly green hydrogen? What is really cost efficient as alternatives to fossil gas? And what does it mean for public infrastructure, for infrastructure development and public support? Looking into the future, climate neutral energy systems, we see that hydrogen really supplies the last 8 to 20%, so rather niches than across the board. And those niches are specific applications, mostly for industry, and also as backup for the power sector. For Germany, we have recently published a major report on climate neutral Germany in 2045, and this is the basic message that emerges from there. Now, the green hydrogen will not be forthcoming unless we have a massive upscaling of renewable electricity production, because currently the context is that 99% of the hydrogen is fossil fuel based. Now, what does it mean when we're looking at the green molecules, specifically at hydrogen? In our work, we have started to really look at the specific end-use applications that do need the green molecules and in the different sectors. For us, it's uncontroversial that there are some industry applications, technical applications, technical processes where we do not have alternatives to green molecules because direct electrification will not help us to come to climate neutrality. This is direct iron reduction, steel. When you look at transport, as in the big picture in 2019, we were already saying for long-haul aviation, maritime shipping, we will probably need some quota system for fossil-free fuels. For the power sector, already mentioned, it's uncontroversial long-term storage for variable renewable energy backup. We do have some cold spells with little wind and sun in the winter in parts of Europe. And there we do need to have the reliability that you can still have the electricity, you can heat your homes. And in the building sector, really the area is district heating, but not across the board, but really some residual heat load where we see green molecules if other options do not exist. And this very much depends on the specificity, on the specific situation. From that perspective, it's quite good from what I've seen the Commission is thinking about to have much stronger commitment of member states to really do an assessment of district heating systems, how they could be made green. Then there are some controversial applications, high temperature heat in industry, trucks and buses. There the picture is really moving in tendency towards batteries or direct electrification. And when it comes to the power sector, it's all about the size. How much do we actually need? Because there are many other flexibility options which are not based on molecules, but battery technologies and other storage options. And then we believe there are currently discussed some ideas for using green hydrogen, which are really not good ideas because direct electrification is much more cost efficient. This concerns low temperature heat, cars, electric cars are the way to go, light duty vehicles, and also heating of individual buildings where clearly heat pumps are the choice of the technology because they're much, much more energy efficient than using green molecules. I leave it here as an input. Oh, so then to your question, what does it mean about the targets? For us at this point, the target is probably too high level, James, and we would be zooming in on trying to articulate in the legislative package the specific application priorities that we need for the different users, in particular for industry, because we need all the green hydrogen, most of the green hydrogen in the next years that we can produce for industry to go climate neutral. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matthias. As ever, there's lots of very interesting information you put in there, and there are things that we can agree with and things where, of course, you naturally would expect us to disagree. And this is one of the beauties of the debate. I think we can absolutely agree on the fact that we know more unabated gas in 2050. And I think this is seeing as you have non-controversial, controversial and bad idea, I think this is non-controversial. I think we can all agree on that. It'll be very interesting actually to get Federica's take later on about what you said about not in buildings, as I know EHI have a different view on that. But I would thank you very much, Matthias, and I hope we get a chance to come back to some of those questions. I'll invite Federica now indeed to join us. And Federica, as the Secretary General of the European Heating Association, representing all the different types of heating, rather than putting you on the spot and taking Matthias's lead and asking you a question, I will ask you, EHI are one of the signatories to that letter that I mentioned in my introduction Why have EHI, as a broad representative body of all different heating technologies, why have you decided to sign up to that targets letter? And what does it mean for the heating industry, heating sector in Europe today? And good morning, nice to see you.
Good morning to you. Renewable gases and renewable gas targets indeed are important for us. Of course, we see this very much from, not so much the let's say your angle as suppliers and distributors, but really more from the end users, heating industry, but also consumer end user side. And of course, the increased supply of renewable and decarbonized gases for us will just drive down the price of such, and with overwhelming at the moment heating market or heating installations running on gas, it is very much important that to reach in time the climate goals that we have for 2050, that we actually have renewable based heating. And that means on the one side, renewable electricity, on the other side, also renewable gases. So we think that by making targets for the supply of all types of decarbonized gases, whether it's biomethane, synthetic methane, whether it's hydrogen indeed, that will help driving down the cost of such gases, and therefore help decarbonize those buildings that need to let's say to have an alternative to electrification. We know that electrification, and we like the idea actually that electrification will grow in the heating sector, but we also see it from from the sides of industry and from the market and from the installations and the types of buildings that we have in Europe. We are pretty much convinced that direct electrification is difficult to achieve in the time frame that we have for 2050, and therefore renewable gases are important. We are actually not the only ones to see direct electrification as by 2050 as a realistic for buildings. In fact, the European Commission itself, it's in its long-term scenario for decarbonization for 2050, doesn't see more than, say, between 35 and 40% of direct electrification. So we need to have other alternatives. And amongst the alternatives, together with technologies like solar thermal, CHP, micro CHP, particularly for individual buildings that were mentioned before, biomass for those places where there is going to be abundance of that, and other renewable fuels. Along those, there should be renewable gases. What is interesting is from the side of technologies that the new generation combustion technologies are already able to run on renewable gases. They're fully compatible. It was mentioned before also by Alexander. There has been already innovation in terms of even hydrogen compatibility. So, we're quite confident that we can achieve the 2050 climate targets with this combination. But of course, there needs to be quite a move also from the supply side. And here's where I'm looking at you, even though I don't see you, but I'm looking at you. So obviously targets are not sufficient. This was, now I've seen you. So targets are also for us not sufficient, but they are necessary to drive this market. As you know, I think everybody knows, heating systems, particularly what you have already at home, are hidden in the cellar, behind the closet somewhere. It's not really, this is not really yet, let's say, a technology that that could be like a mobile phone that you want to get the latest generation. You still need to push consumers to actually get awareness, first of all, of the efficiency of what they have already at home, and then help them drive towards renewable heating. So this is why our industry is also calling for a synchronization in the legislation that looks also at the role of eco-design and also energy labeling, because these are instruments that actually make that link between what you actually have in your cellar and what alternatives there are to what you have in the cellar, which is largely based on fossil fuels and is largely, that we know. make that link between that and what is actually the alternatives in the market. And therefore, that's why we are calling for example, already having a pictogram on new appliances that are being sold that indicate which technologies can already run on green gases. So I think it's important for us to have targets because that makes the link between the supply side and the use side and brings those technologies and that bring renewable heating up in the light and the eyes of consumers.
Well, thank you very much, Federica. And I was going to put my camera on and I thought I'd give you the wrong idea that you have to stop. So I put my camera on when you need to get to the end of it. So no, thanks for that. Again, indeed, I quite like the idea that you and Alexandra both put in that the targets are necessary but not sufficient. You've both used that phrase, but I think that's fair because we're looking at an overall enabling framework. I think it's also important, as you point out, the development of H2 products, that hydrogen-ready products are already being developed and already becoming available for the market. And I think that is a good indication of direction of travel, at least your members feel that we should be going in. I think that I will pass on. We've already got 2 questions from the audience, I will say, and they actually are focusing on heat, Federica and Alexandra, just for your awareness. Audience, dear members of the audience, please do send more questions in. We will move into the Q&A section whilst we wait for Mr. Bouchoy to arrive. But now I'd like to invite Sean Ennis to join us, who is a research fellow from the Centre on Regulation in Europe and also based in the University of East Anglia. Sean, welcome. Of course, in the past, Sarah, as we call you, the Centre for European Regulation, have looked at the issues around targets to develop renewable and low carbon gases. And again, this was sometime 2019, September or so, the report came out. How are you now in your organization seeing the future, and how are you expecting the development of renewable and decarbonized gases to be brought on, and are you still foreseeing the use of targets to help deliver that?
Thank you very much, James, for the invitation to be here with you today. It's really a pleasure to be speaking in this group and with your organization. Sarah has taken a position in the past that some targets for 2030 of renewable gas and hydrogen of around something around 10% would be desirable. And admittedly, that was before the Green Deal and some of the other raising of ambitions. But basically, Sarah is very much in favor of the idea that there should be some types of targets around renewable gas and hydrogen. The comments I'm giving are really from an economist perspective, I would add today, and not an engineering perspective or an industry one. And I would note that we also have a more recent SARE report on sector coupling that makes around 40 policy recommendations, highlighting the need for a combined use of a number of policies: carbon pricing, extension of integration of existing electricity and gas markets, industrial policy to promote new industries such as hydrogen, biomethane, and CCS. One route towards implementation would be via CO2 pricing generally, because that's technically neutral. But these prices have really fluctuated substantially over time and leave a lot of uncertainty over rates of return. And when there aren't long-term guaranteed prices and there's not a guaranteed return on investment, we think that investment would fall massively. And maybe I should say, at least I think that. And the problem is particularly high for gas, because there's no obvious reason to expect a low marginal cost of production from renewable gas, unlike for wind and solar. And thus it combines both a need for substantial production and other infrastructure investments with non-trivial marginal cost. And this is certainly not a downside, I would say. Gas is, I think we would all recognize, I hope we would, a really crucial part of the energy mix for making sure that that we're in balance constantly. And supply cannot be left to chance without risking massive blackouts. So that's one of the reasons why there's this challenge for the preconditions for initial investment that are needed to relaunch renewable gas. And that transition process is one that really must start now if it's to be well advanced or completed by 2050. And this is because reaching a high share of renewable gas would likely require some very substantial new production and transmission infrastructure investments. And so taking account of the fact there's a lot of variation in member state climates and existing infrastructure, allowing varying member state commitments makes good sense. Investments are clearly very much determined by the rate of return on investment, but they're also affected by risks. And the best way to reduce those risks is via some certainty and creation of clear commitments. So a commitment by an announced renewable goal, I think, is really important for the future. I also think one other area that's extremely important to emphasize is financial support from state aid for developing the new technologies and getting them out there. And so costs do need to be kept under control in all these processes. One possibility that's been considered for state aid is carbon contracts for differences. They could be multi-sector, and if they're multi-sector, I think that helps for industrial decarbonization and may lead to more competition and repeated cost observations for getting project costs down substantially. And then state aid with a funding gap approach, I think just needs modification for gas. It's been very much focused in the past on having only some percentage of the funding gap being covered, and I think with gas we would need we don't have that same situation as we did with solar and wind, where the marginal cost of production is much lower after the investment is made. So covering the full funding gap would make a lot of sense to me. And what I call a project-based state aid could also make sense, where there may be some higher cost structures here, and if the true costs are well known by evaluators of aid, then I think project-based state aid can also make sense. So maybe I'll just stop there and hand back to you. I've let you know some of our thoughts on this, and happy to say more.
Well, it's really interesting, Sean. I really appreciate the insights that you provided, and also to understand the evolution of your own thinking. And it's good that everyone's having evolution of thinking in the last couple of years, as of course the policy environment has changed, which makes a lot of sense. I think that elements that you touched on are really important. That is, the reduction of cost for these technologies and these gases is key. And of course, investor certainty is very important. And that's why targets are a good idea, because they provide that kind of possibility to reduce cost whilst providing the investor certainty, reducing risk. I think you also touched on state aid, which is important. We've seen in the recent guidelines that came out for the member states when they're considering their state aid in relation to energy and environment, that indeed certain paragraphs have indicated that where countries have undertaken a binding commitment to have, say, it doesn't say a target per se, but a binding commitment to the overall reduction of the sort of decarbonization of gas, that indeed they can invest in the gas, use state aid to invest in gaseous infrastructure, as long as there is a pathway to decarbonize. So state aid, I think, will also be seen as a tool that can help the decarbonization of the gas sector, being allowed to develop, as I see it, the infrastructure that can carry those particular fuels that are needed. I'd invite all of you actually to put your cameras back on, Federica, Matthias, Alexandra, because I think that Mr. Bouchard still hasn't arrived. And Eurogas team, do let me know when he's arrived, because I tend to get quite caught up in the discussion, the debate. We've had two questions come in, one from Harman Decker at European Biogas Association and one from an anonymous attendee. They both touch on the same point, and they talk about hydrogen in buildings. And Harman is saying hydrogen seems first and foremost to be going to industry. And why don't we think about biomethane, therefore, in buildings? And the anonymous attendee is saying that, you know, there's a debate around the role of hydrogen heating, and should hydrogen be used in heating as a priority sector? I mean, the first question was to you, Alexander, but actually, because we've got EHI, we've got Federica with us, I'd like to start with Federica, and then probably go to Matthias, and then come to you, Alexandra, and then I come to you, Sean. Just for your views on hydrogen in heating. And Federica, you've touched on it in your opening point, but maybe you can be more specific in the response, especially to Harman, about this sort of hydrogen or biomethane.
Yeah, well, I'm not a, yeah, thanks, thanks, James. I'm not a specialist in the grids part, but from our point of view, again, whether it's biomethane, whether it's green hydrogen, whether it's going to be electricity, it will all, the choice will all depend on the local conditions. Buildings are very different in Europe, from north to south. Think of, countryside cottage, think of, a skyscraper in Frankfurt, think about, a little house on the seaside in Sicily. They are all different. There's very different energy infrastructures across Europe, climate zones. So it's very difficult, although it's a beautiful, idea from a policy point of view to use that one solution that saves it all. Unfortunately, we are in a complex world. This is not that easy. So we think that biomethane will certainly play a role where, for example, in certain countries it's produced, or there's more chance of having it. I know that France, for example, is prioritizing that. Other parts will be used, other parts of Europe will use other fuels, and local conditions, even within the same country, will define that. On a more general question, because I see that Mr. Bourgeois is there, so I don't want to take.
Yes, indeed. No problem. Finish your answer, Federica, and then we'll go.
Just a sentence on the more general point on hydrogen for heating. I think any big sweeping statement, yes or no, I think again don't reflect the complexity and the opportunities. There's a buildings roundtable of the Clean Hydrogen Alliance that has been set up and analyzed this, and there's a consensus that because electrification cannot do all of the decarbonization of buildings in Europe, then you will have to have something else, and that hydrogen can play one role alongside electricity. In specific for buildings, we see the opportunity of using hydrogen in buildings to ramp up the market for hydrogen, also in other sectors. Technologies for hydrogen in buildings are already ready. Therefore, it's not a question of developing the technology that will in the future enable, but we can already help right now ramp up that market, create a market for hydrogen, which will benefit the industry sector, will benefit heavy industry, heavy transport, etc. So I think from a macro point of view, this is one of the some of the reasons. And again, the technologies are already ready. So it's paradoxically the sector where there's more controversy is actually the most ready sector that we have today. And I will now stop at this because I think.
No, thanks for that. Thanks, Frederic, and thanks for wrapping it up.
Because I need to leave in 10 minutes. Can I just one quick reaction?
Yes,
so
Matthias.
Thanks, and it's going to be short. So we are quite concerned about the costs. If we are zooming in on some end-use applications where we know this is not the priority for the green molecules application in order to bring us to climate priority, but then we decide on this pathway and make the very significant infrastructure upgrade investments which are necessary, we might be ending up in a very high cost scenario to the detriment of consumers, because it's going to be expensive. And in our analysis, we are really trying to see what is the cost-effective pathway. So at this point in time, we see that the investments into green hydrogen and green hydrogen infrastructure should really go where we have the no regret uses and the no regret infrastructure investments. And this is particularly important for some parts of industry at the moment.
Thank you very much for that, Matthias, and I appreciate you kept that very short. Mr. Bourgeois, good morning and welcome to this Eurogas Let's Meet. Thank you very much for joining us, and we're very happy that you could still find the time to join us this morning. We've had, as you can hear, a quite robust discussion already about the ramping up of renewable and low carbon gases. And as you are the chair of the Industry and Energy Committee within the European Parliament, and also leading on the opinion of the Industry and Energy Committee in relation to methane emissions, we would be very interested in hearing your points of view of how you see the decarbonisation of gas going forward, and whether or not there is a specific role for targets to be played. Good morning, and over to you. We're all very happy to hear you.
Good morning. Sorry that I will not be able to participate to the whole meeting, as I had to be part of the official launch of European Space Program together with Commissioner Breton and Minister Heitor, and there are several meetings in Romanian Parliament that are happening now. I would like to start by thanking Eurogas for organizing these talks. Particularly important, the talk today will focus on whether we need binding targets to lower the green gas intensity of gas consumed in Europe and increase the demand for renewable gas in the context of meeting the 2030 assumed target by our leaders. Making the necessary changes in the energy sector in order to achieve the 2030 target, one that will be feasible and economical beneficial as well, and reach climate neutrality by 2050, it's a challenging task. In particular for those member states that are still highly dependent on fossil fuels, and here I can include, of course, Romania. The structural changes needed in the energy sector will have important social and economic consequences. The Union is committed to the ambition of climate neutrality by 2050 and tackling climate change. And the Parliament is backing up the efforts, and it's something that you know well, this. But in order to reach our climate ambitions, we need to back the green transition that we are all expecting to happen soon with a consistent and horizontal energy policy. It is important to see environmental policies and the ones in the field of energy reinforcing each other and not as one subservient to the other. The green transition will create significant investment opportunities, will help member states restore their economies, but we need to be sure that at the same time this will create jobs, will provide certainty to investors, and for sure it should accelerate the much needed economic recovery. Gas indeed is a feasible solution to reach the 2030 target for many member states, especially for my country, as you know, and of course, other Central East European member states that are still dependent on coal. We cannot make this transition without the help of gas, and that's why Romania in particular and other countries, and of course this is the position of EPP group that I'm a member of, looks to the gas as an essential fuel for transition in order to reach our targets. Moreover, investing now in gas infrastructure, it will mean to invest in the infrastructure that will serve for the future as well, for example, for renewable sources of energy, such as hydrogen. During the transition phase, gas pipelines and interconnections play an important role to ensuring energy security, supply, affordability, and sustainability. I believe that we should discuss also about targets. The title of the discussion today, I believe that we should look to the gas with an objective look, and not only from a political or from an enthusiastic perspective. It is not feasible to reach our targets without the help and the support of the gas, and the decarbonized gas could represent a solution for the transition and even beyond 2050 if the technologies for decarbonization, for carbon capture, will be mature enough to allow us to do that. Thank you so much, and I will remain in close contact with Eurogas and all the relevant actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bușoi, and thank you very much for pointing out some of the important elements that you're working on. And again, we are very grateful that you were able to join us following that important launch of the Space Agency this morning. We'll take one point that you said, of course, about we cannot make our targets without gas, and that this decarbonization of gas is also important for beyond 2050 and the role that it will play in a climate and carbon neutral future. And we must take into account the social and economic consequences. If you can stay a little bit, that's fine. We will continue the discussion. We have a number of questions. I would like to invite the other panelists to come back. We will just finish off the point on heating, I think, very briefly. Maybe Alexandra, if you have any further points on that before we move on to another question.
Indeed, I saw the questions in the Q&A, and first of all, I would like to clarify that we often confound hydrogen with green gases. And in Matthias's presentation as well, I saw in this prioritization table that he would switch between hydrogen and renewable gases quite quickly. So I think that's something to distinguish between. We have buildings that are connected to the gas grids. I think maybe 40% of heating and cooling is based on gas. Higher shares of renewable gases in the existing gas grids will actually rapidly help those buildings to decarbonize at lower cost. This is something that is quite clear. Then indeed, the blending of hydrogen into the existing gas grids is a question, but we know that hydrogen could be blended in most gas grids up to 20%. And we know that existing equipment could accept up to 20% of hydrogen in. And also, what I must say, this prioritization of hydrogen to specific sectors sounds to me a bit like micromanaging the energy sector. We cannot at EU level decide that who will get hydrogen and who will not get hydrogen. There will be industries that will want hydrogen. There will be industrial sectors like the paper and pulp sector, which will rely to some extent on biomass, to some extent on renewable gases that they produce locally themselves. So this is, we cannot decide today who gets hydrogen. I think what we can do at European level is to decide that hydrogen is important, that renewable gases are important, and then leave it to the national and local levels to actually see whether hydrogen will be available, whether they have enough renewable electricity that is at times curtailed, that could be then converted into hydrogen and used in district heating or even used in the existing gas grids.
No, that's fine, Alexandra. I'd like to pick up and move on to another question, but I'll pick up the point you made about it being targeted for specific sectors. And indeed, I think Eleonora Morrow from E3G is what do panelists think about the point made by Matthias on suggesting any renewable gas target is specifically targeted to the uncontroversial deployment sectors. Remember, Matthias put up that graph. And Sean, I'll come to you on that one so that I can bring you in, Sean. You've talked about gas targets from a Sarah point of view, and they sound like more general ones. Do you have a view on whether they should be specifically targeted to specific deployment sectors, or are you more convinced that there is an overall need for a general target? I'm interested in your view on that, Sean.
Thank you, James. Just as a matter of general principle, I'd really support what Alexandra was saying, that it's difficult to predict now exactly where the best uses will be, and it is very important to maintain a focus on cost efficiency overall, as Matthias was emphasizing. And I think that setting up a structure that will yield cost efficiency is what really matters, and that the structure is not necessarily to say this will go there and this other substance will go here. It is much more to set up an allocation mechanism that will work and allow for adaptations in the long run as technology changes.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Sean. I think I would also take another anonymous attendee. I'm sorry, I haven't got the name of these people. They're asking about the overall targets for green gas by 2030, 40, and 50, but also talking about sub-targets in a way, but also industry, transport, power, and heating in these years. So they're asking, is anybody making a proposal for this? Mr. Bouchoy, I wonder if I might ask you, when you are considering in the report you're currently writing on methane emissions, you're talking about the European Commission considering the idea of targets. Do you see the need for an overall target for this sort of decarbonisation of gas, or would you also see it on a sectoral basis, or is that something that you are still discussing within the EPP?
Yes, this is something that we are still discussing. Of course, the methane strategy is extremely relevant for the gas industry and also for achieving our targets. But you know that before setting specific targets, we have first to collect data in a manner that is the most effective and correct one. That's why we need our tools, even the satellites. I'm coming from EU space and from praising EU SPA and Galileo project and others. So here also they are extremely useful. Also to be in a close contact with the industry to see what is feasible and what is not. So the discussion is still open. You know that the legislation will follow. Now we are just reacting to a strategy of European Commission, which of course is extremely important and relevant, but in parallel we are talking with the European Commission to see exactly how will they define the legislation. And we are extremely, at least me, but also many of my colleagues from ITRE committee, the political coordinators, the coordinators of the political groups, my colleagues, which are shadow rapporteurs on this, which is an opinion to ENVI committee. Hopefully the legislation will be ITRE main responsibility, and this is something that we fight for. So we are extremely sensitive to the inputs from those which are working on the field. So for this to have a final decision, it is important to hear from you and also experts from European Commission and from other organizations. We should not forget that we have a target. We have to reach these targets, but otherwise we should not go in a direction where things are not feasible or even dangerous for our competitivity and our industries and our jobs.
Yeah, that's indeed very clear, and we also very much look forward to the outcome of the discussions that you have, and seeing as well what the European Commission will put forward, Mr. Bushoi. So really appreciate that. I would like to go back to Federica on a residential heat pumps question from Benedict Herges in Siemens. Saying they come with high capex costs per household, and saying, you know, H2 blending with additional OPEX costs on heating bill. From a public spending perspective, couldn't H2 blending be a good option to decarbonise heating, even if it's less efficient? How are you seeing that in the heating industry? Is that a view that you share, or one which you would find more controversial? Federica, your views on that would be welcome.
Yeah, I mean, heat pumps are now a very small part of the market, of the installed stock, certainly, but we see them growing very much, and particularly it's now booming in the new build market. So it's certainly an option whereby also the cost element makes sense, particularly in that market that we see definitely growing. But you know, building stock is very different, very diverse. So for all those old, badly insulated buildings, it's then the cost efficiency of the appliance is different. So heat pumps will certainly play a role and will be increasingly playing a role. But for those type of buildings where this becomes less efficient also, then other alternatives, for example, those fired by green gases. And here, you know, I'm with Alexandra. I'll now say green gases to mean, you know, decarbonized and renewable gases, whether it's hydrogen or biomethane or others. Well, those represent a less costly investment for the consumer. And here I would like to link to what Mattia was saying. Unfortunately, he's just left on the cost side. Hydrogen ready appliances that our industry is innovating in at the moment are actually quite cost competitive. So we calculate that more or less you add to the cost of a current new generation condensing boiler perhaps a 30% premium for a hydrogen compatible. This is quite interesting for a consumer, because you would use then you would be able to use the same infrastructure, more or less, that you have in the building. You wouldn't have to adapt everything to the new technology. So you would have just a small increase on the cost of for example, a condensing boiler. And that's quite interesting from the cost competitive point of view from the consumer side. In terms of the energy, the cost of hydrogen, of course, there's different studies going on at the moment, but we see that there are increasingly studies. There was one, for example, from Bloomberg, New Energy, just a couple of months ago, that foresees in the arch between 2030 and 2050, the cost of green hydrogen to be competitive with the one of even fossil gas or natural gas today, that I think is very interesting as a development. So we should, of course, look also the hydrogen market and the green hydrogen market in, you know, how would I say, in divenire, now it comes in Italian, sorry. But
it's okay, we would like to hear Italian, Federica.
So I think certainly the cost is an interesting issue, but we think that actually it's really the cost that will make hydrogen, green hydrogen appliances more competitive. Yeah. Therefore, a good solution to complement heat pumps.
Yeah, thank you for that, Federica. I'm going to take one final question, which I'm going to ask to Sean and Alexandra, and then ask Christian, Mr. Bouchoy, final points before we close, ladies and gentlemen. So please just bear with us. There's a couple of questions that are related. They're asking about any targets to do decarbonized gas. Should there be sub-targets for blending? So I'd like to hear from Sean and Alexandra, and Sean, whether or not there's a position in your organization, Sarah, on blending, and Alexandra, your view as a user, if you will, of gas, what your view on blending is. That would be very much appreciated. So Sean, first to you, then to Alexandra, and then I'll come to Mr. Bouchoy at the very end to ask him that question as well, and then we'll close. Sean.
Thank you very much, James. Look, I don't have a very strong view on blending. I think what is key is some of the engineering constraints that apply when you have blended gases, and at some moment of transition, it becomes very tricky as you move to very high level of blending. It's not utilizable by many devices that are pre-existing, and that may lead to needs for dual delivery systems in the long run. So that's when some of the very tricky investment decisions have to be made. That may involve reutilization of existing capacity in a smart way.
Thank you for that, Sean, and thanks also for joining us this morning. Alexandra, a quick final word from you on blending and how you in the cogen sector see it.
So Cogen Europe is in favor of blending. Indeed, there are some limits beyond which you decide to not blend, but go for 100% hydrogen, I would say. However, the blending part is important for actually accelerating emission reductions fast and cost effectively, because actually we don't have time to wait for net zero solutions today. So we have to get to net zero by 2050, but we also have to limit the volume of emissions rapidly and cost effectively. So we think that this is what blending is. This is the purpose of blending. Rather than having targets for blending, we think that blending should not be forbidden. It should be allowed for those regions and countries that decide to go for it. And so, yeah, on the CHP side, so on the gas equipment side, blending is, or up to 20% of hydrogen is possible with existing technologies. We actually have district heating projects where the CHP can run from 0 to 100% hydrogen, depending on the availability of the hydrogen at any point in time. And we've learned from this manufacturer that their CHPs that are now based on natural gas can be upgraded to hydrogen at the cost of €5 per ton of CO2 abated. So that's quite cost effective if you think about it. And we think that such solution should be promoted, in fact.
Thank you for that, Alexandra, and thanks also for those good figures. Always helpful to get a bit of facts and figures into any discussion. Mr. Bouchoy, I give you the final word. We talked about blending, but please feel free to address any point that you would like to. And again, thanks very much for joining us.
No, I followed with interest the part of the discussion that I was able to participate, and I believe that this discussion should be also followed by dialogue with members of European Parliament interested in in this issue. So maybe at the beginning of the autumn, Eurogas will organize a meeting with some of the colleagues from ITRE and also maybe ENVI committee to understand a little bit better the realities and to see what is the best solution. It is clear that we increased the ambitions in the past months. The 2030 target, it is very ambitious. And of course, the 2050 target is even more ambitious because it will be not easy to decarbonize our economy or society to reach the climate ambition, but I believe it's possible. That's why I believe there is not a solution fit for all. In my message to European Commission, waiting for the proposal package Fit for 55 from 14th of July, we send a message that this package will need to reflect the realities and take into account also the different starting points for member states. Everything should be backed by solid impact assessments. And as I already mentioned, and I will always highlight this, it's important not to forget, first, the competitiveness of our industries, the security of our energy supply, the fact that we need to preserve jobs and even increase jobs and not to lose jobs in this process, and due to the proposals that we are making, and also extremely important, the affordability of the prices for energy for our population and for our industries. If these are secured, then of course we can imagine different solutions. Going in depth to see how we impose targets or sub-targets and everything that you are discussing, which is not necessarily technical, but it is a little bit more than a political discussion. I believe that these solutions we should find together. And I'm, as always, and as you know, very open and available to receive the input from the industry and from all relevant stakeholders. And thank you very much and good luck in everything. And thank you for inviting me to this discussion. Thank you.
And thanks to you, Mr. Bușoi, and thank you for spending your time with us this morning and passing your views and the views of the European Parliament and the EPP in particular. We always appreciate to hear your views. Ladies and gentlemen, all that remains for me to say is that indeed we are living in a time of increased ambition. And I think from what we've heard today, this morning, it's very clear that we will need gas to achieve that ambition. We will need to decarbonize gas as well. That's also clear. And all of the people who've taken part, the keynote speaker and the participants, to one level or another, perhaps some more general and perhaps some more defined, have talked in favor of using targets or quotas or an element of what I would call investor certainty in the development of hydrogen or renewable gases. And thus, I do believe there is a growing awareness of the need to make sure that the regulatory framework is fit for purpose. And that's where we have Fit for 55, or perhaps fit for 60 in the European Parliament, Mr. Bușoi. The Fit for 55 package should therefore also be fit to enable gas to make sure that it contributes the necessary role it must play in decarbonizing the European economy whilst maintaining affordable prices for consumers and industry. Thank you all very much. And dear participants, we haven't got through all the questions. As ever, we will take the questions and we will write answers to them from the Eurogas perspective and post them on LinkedIn. So all questions will be answered. I thank very much Mr. Bușoi for joining us, Sean, Federica, Alexandra. Matthias had to leave to go to another press conference, but we're very, very happy to have such great panelists and a great keynote speaker with us today. Ladies and gentlemen who participated, great thanks for you for joining us also today. And we hope you found this very interesting. There will be another Let's Meet after the summer. So I'll take the opportunity to wish you all a very good summer and let us see what the Revolution Day on 14th of July brings for us in terms of an energy revolution. Everyone keep well, take care and have a great summer. Bye-bye.